focus on hitting your goals in every area of your business. Remember, the universe rewards the bold. A leader has to take the risks.
Hey, Daniel, how are you?
Hey, David, what's happening? How are you?
It's great to see you, man. It's been a long time since we booked this. I was trying to think when this was, but I feel like it's back in the fall.
You know, it was a long time, man. It has just been, I try to make sure I do podcasts every single week. And so it's just, but I only do them on Wednesdays generally. And so it's like, kind of like I got this little window and they just get booked so fast, so it's been fun. I mean, we've had a real blast. I've interviewed so many great people and I'm excited about meeting you. I've been reading
Likewise.
a lot about you and so this is going to be some fun. So you made it to Wealth on the Beach podcast, man.
I'm excited. I'm excited to be here. This is fun. And obviously I love your setting much. It's getting nicer in North Carolina, but I always love talking with you because your background's always phenomenal.
I love it. So check this out, David Richards. You're an author, Marine, corporate America, what used to be in corporate America, yoga instructor. You got all kinds of stuff you're doing, man. I'm very interested. I wanted to ask you to first tell me a little bit about your book, man, The Lighthouse Keeper, and tell us a little bit about that and what kind of motivated you to write that.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. So I fell into yoga right as I got out of the Marines, and that wasn't my script. I wasn't planning on that, but it just bumped into it and just became enamored with it. And yoga was kind of one of the vehicles I used to get back into writing, because I knew once I got out of the Marines, I felt like I was in a position in my life where I could finally settle down and write, because in the military, it just wasn't the environment to do that based on moving or traveling or being deployed or whatever. And so I wrote my first book in 2017 about finding your purpose in life. And in one of the chapters in the book, and it's something actually I pulled from a yoga class, was I went to my students and I said, your mind is like an ocean. And that's where all your memories are, all your people you've ever met, everybody's in your mind. And your awareness is like a lighthouse. And generally through life, we create habits or patterns. And so our lighthouse goes in a certain direction every day. But through the discipline and practice of willpower, through meditation, through focus, we can start to direct the lighthouse to where we want it to go. So we can start to shape and design the life we want. So I wrote that into my first book, and it stuck with me. I knew it felt good. And then about 18 months later, I watched a YouTube video on a Hindu monk who basically said the exact same thing. He didn't use the lighthouse analogy, but he said your mind is this blank space where all your memories are, and your awareness is this bulb of light that just goes anywhere in it. And I just realized, oh my God, he's talking about the lighthouse keeper. And I knew I had a book then. And so I started mapping out what the journey was going to be. And it took me about 9 months to write it. But
So, I mean, did you always like to write? I mean, is this something like of a passion of yours from a young age, or?
Yeah, no, I did. So believe it or not, I came out of the womb a romantic. I still remember to this day my first kiss. This girl named Mimi Taco knocked me over a cardboard stone wall. We were playing in a castle in kindergarten, and she knocked me over and fell on top of me and gave me a kiss. And I was probably writing poems to girls when I was 7 or 8. And I fed my imagination with comic books, if you can believe it or not. Before the Avengers, Marvel Studios in DC were juggernauts of the cinema world. And that just sparked my imagination. And so even though I was athletic in high school, I really loved writing. It was just space to kind of let loose and explore my imagination. And I was fortunate enough, I got national recognition for a short story I wrote when I was in high school. I had poetry that won contests. But as I turned to go to college, I knew I was going to join the military because they were paying for college. And I figured I'd be international business. We'd spent some time in Japan growing up as a kid. And so I thought international business would be the way to go. And finally, I was so just kind of distracted and I didn't really like it. And I went to a guidance counselor and they said, well, what do you like to do? I said, I like to write. And they said, well, then be an English major. I'm like, okay. And so I did, but again, joined the military. I was in Somalia early in my career off the coast of Kuwait for Desert Storm. And so I just knew writing wasn't really going to happen while I was in the Marines. But when I got out, it was something that just, I knew I could do it again. And honestly, Daniel, I spent 7 years once I got out of the Marines working on horror stories. And on 3 or 4 different occasions, I would sit down over the course of a few weeks. I'd write like 100 pages of material, and then it would just peter out. And I couldn't figure out how to take the story to the direction I wanted it to go. And I just got so frustrated. So I'd go away from it for about 18 months, come back with a new idea, really inspired to write. Same thing would happen, 100 pages. And I just got so frustrated. And finally in 2017, I read Napoleon Hill's Think and Grow Rich. And that changed my life. It really did. And so I wrote a purpose statement that I'm going to help people find their purpose in life. And I started working on my self-help book, Whiskey and Yoga.
Oh my goodness, that's fantastic. That's so exciting to hear. That, well, I mean, Think and Grow Rich changed my life too, man. I mean, in 1996, I read it, and it was like, forget it, man. It was, my whole life was like, I mean, I saw the world. The question I did have, well, first of all, I want to say thank you so much for your service.
Absolutely. Thanks.
And then, but what sports did you play growing up?
Yeah, so I had a small run-in with football when we lived in Japan, and didn't like that all that much. So I did soccer and tennis, and then in high school, and then in college, I gravitated back to football and basketball, and I played intramural sports most of my career. So
you probably kept the poem thing kind of like on the down low, with all your sports buddies, or did you tell them that you're a writer? And
no, it's funny you say that. Not really. I mean, it wasn't cool. Like I was.
Yeah, no, of course. Well, that's why I'm thinking, if I played baseball and football, and if I told all my buddies that I was a poetry, guy, I don't know, it might have not went over well. But again, I know times have changed today, but for me personally,
well, I'll tell you honestly, it wasn't so much. I mean, my friends knew I wrote poetry, but when I got in the Marines in early 2000, I found a muse, which I just found this woman who was really inspiring, and I started writing poetry again. And I remember sharing that with my fellow Marines, and you want to talk about like raised eyebrows, and people like that was questionable. Like that was, a Marine writing poetry was questionable, even though like my first poem that I really wrote was about Achilles, and I still have a copy of it. It's epic, but it's those two cultures did not necessarily go well. So it was a weird choice.
I could imagine. So, okay. So I want to take you a little bit back to the childhood again.
Yeah.
And I want to ask about your parents. Like, what did your parents do?
So my dad was in the Marines. So he served 31 years on active duty. My mom was a nurse when they met. And then because we moved every 2 or 3 years, she got into a space where she would do kind of retail. And there might be shops where the military base we'd live. So when we lived in Japan, for example, she worked at a jewelry shop. And so she would travel to the Philippines or to Taiwan or Thailand to get jewelry and then bring it back for people to buy. But yeah, that was it. And then when my dad got out in 91 and went, or 1990, and jumped into corporate America too.
So a lot of people say that when you are a military brat, I guess they're called, right? And you move around a lot. And I mean, looking back, I mean, do you feel like that was good or bad, or what are your feelings about that?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's something that it took me a while to reconcile, because initially I didn't learn to temper my expectations with friendships and relationships. And what I mean by that is, as a kid, you don't know. So you throw yourself into these relationships, and then 2 or 3 years later, you're like, oh, we're leaving and I'm never going to see you again. And that was so hard. And it was just, I didn't like that. And even though, I've come back to a place of peace with it, where like I look back, and the fact that in 1979, I lived in Japan. I know it's ancient history for some people, but I lived in Japan when so few people had that opportunity and experience, that I got exposure to Eastern philosophy and Eastern culture that was unprecedented, really. And so I was really grateful for it. But growing up, I really kind of resented my dad, because it was, you're the guy who's making us move all the time because you're the Marine. And and obviously I kind of was so distracted by that I made it my profession. And so I said, now I'm going to get paid to move and be miserable for moving all the time. And then finally I kind of woke up and be like, you know what, you don't have to do this. You can figure out something else to do. So I've come to a place of peace with it, but it was something that for the longest time that it was a struggle, because I always, it's kind of like you're damned if you do, if you're damned if you don't. Like you can say, and this was obviously well before the internet, but you could obviously go to a place where you're like, okay, I'm not going to really get close to people because they're going to leave or I'm going to leave soon. And then you don't really have fulfilling relationships, or you throw yourself in and then it's just like, okay, there's no Facebook. I'm not going to write you letters every day. So bye. And maybe I'll see you on LinkedIn in 30 years.
What's interesting that I've kind of studied that subject, just wondering about it, and what I always have learned is that you end up building even better relationships, people like you, because you moved so many different places. And you become, I think you become more well-rounded. You become, a person that is easy to make friends. I mean, very approachable, and because you're always making new friends, right?
And that's the one thing I've come to appreciate, is it's very easy to make people feel comfortable, because especially like I think back to, I mean, you said that, it makes me think back to, I had the rare privilege, kind of, at least from a military perspective, to graduate from the same high school that I started in, and it was actually here in North Carolina. And but it wasn't without cost. And at the end of my junior year, my dad got orders to move, so they moved to a military base in Georgia, and I could not fathom the idea of starting my senior year at a new school with people I didn't know. So we kind of decided that I was going to stay with family friends. And that was hard because my parents weren't there, but at the same time, it made me appreciate that the people who did come in their senior year from a different military base, like, you wanted to make those people feel welcome as much as possible. So, and that's certainly something that's carried on with throughout the course of my life, where I've been able to just make people feel comfortable, because obviously we're all journey people in one capacity or another. And my journey just happened to be through lots of different spaces over the course of a good part of my life. But I've been in one place now for 15 years, and that's been a remarkable blessing.
And Cisco Systems, how did you get started with them, and what did you do for them?
Yeah, so Cisco was, when I decided to get out, I mean, really, put this in context, Daniel, I had no experience in the civilian world. I grew up in the military, and even though you're not wearing the uniform, you are part of the military establishment. Like all but really 4 years of my life was lived on military bases, and that is its own universe. It's its own place. Like, people don't lock their doors at night. It's a very different world, because like you're sort of like armed to the teeth, and especially with the military, like with the Marines. So I didn't really know what to expect getting out. I'd done artillery the first part of my military career, and then I switched over to communications because I figured there wasn't a lot of post-military market for people blowing stuff up. And so as I looked to get out and figure what I would do, I really only applied to 3 places. I applied to a defense contractor outside of Washington, D.C. that I knew someone at. I applied to Cisco, and then there was a classmate of, someone who had gone to a university that I'd gone to all in the Marines, who had started a security firm in the Middle East. So he was kind of basically like a mercenary. And I had gotten in contact with him. And so I thought, okay, I can either go be a mercenary in the Middle East and have a life that is dramatic and will never be normal. I can do the defense contract thing, which I kind of wanted to get away from the defense establishment. And so it just worked out that I ended up going to Cisco and starting out working with their military group, their government affairs group. But I was at Cisco for a good while and just did really customer experience, customer service kind of stuff. And that was, going from the military and the Marine Corps to a Fortune 50 company was quite a leap.
Yeah, and you probably took some good lessons from that. I mean, do you recall anything good that you took from that?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, well, it's amazing to see Cisco's environment, Cisco's culture was so diverse and so inclusive, and it it made me appreciate the power of a global company and also the responsibilities of a global company, because in a lot of ways they, their customers aren't just American, their customers aren't just English speaking, they are a global juggernaut, and they have to take that to account, not just in how they deal with their customers, but also the culture they provide for their employees.
And so enter yoga. So where did that journey, like, how did that
Yeah.
happen? Did you have a mentor, or did you read a book, or did you see it
Uh,
online? What was that
so
all about?
yeah, I don't think that I ever saw a yoga studio while I was on active duty. I mean, if I did, it was like the reticular activating system. It just wasn't something I was focused on. So I'm sure I passed them, but it just so happened that I got out in August of 2006, and I came to my parents here in North Carolina because Cisco has a big hub here. And it was that Saturday, I read a Sports Illustrated article about NFL players using yoga to strengthen their midsections. And I thought, you know what? I'm a athletic person. I lift weights a lot. Let me try yoga and see if it helps with stretching or whatever. And so I did my first class that weekend. And it was a gentle yoga class. So if you've ever been to a yoga class, a gentle class is just one where there's not a lot of stress or strain. And I was just kind of indifferent to it. I was like, okay, this doesn't really, I don't feel all that different, whatever. And so I said, I'll give it another shot. So 2 days later, I went to a different class, different style instructor, and we're probably about 40 minutes into the class, and I'm just like pouring sweat. I'm watching the sweat just drip off my forehead, and we're just moving. And I'm like, what is going on? And we're at a point in the class where we're trying to like wrap one arm underneath your leg and the other arm comes behind your body to form a bind. And I couldn't get the bind because I was so tight. And so I'm just watching the sweat pour onto the mat. And the instructor comes by, and this lovely woman in this really soft voice, she says, use your hand towel. So I grab my hand towel and I wipe my face because I think she's like, I can't believe how much this guy is sweating. And then she's like, no, use your hand towel to bind your hands. I'm like, oh, so I put the hand towel behind me. But if you've ever been to a yoga class, there's Shavasana at the end. And that's just basically this stillness where you're just still in what they call corpse pose. And it was this buzz of presence, of being aware. And I remember I got up from that second class and I was just like, what is that? I need more of that in my life. Like, I must have more of that. And part of it was the culture shock of my last assignment in the military was working in Central America. And I might get 50 email a week. I mean, it was, 2006, but I wasn't spending a lot of time in front of a computer. Conversely, when I got to Cisco, I would get 50 email in like 2 hours. And I remember leaving the office and my mind would just be this noise of to-do lists and tasks and reminders and what's coming up tomorrow. And yoga was a place where that just went quiet. And I was like, oh my gosh. And so I got hooked on yoga. A year later, I became an instructor, and now I've been teaching for 15 years.
Oh, wow. 15 years you've been
Yeah.
teaching yoga. So this is so not only did you experience it for yourself, but you're like, well, you know what? Maybe I could help other people too.
Yeah.
So you've kind of always had, David, is that just, I don't know, you seem like a servant leader to me. I mean, is that kind of been in your DNA?
To a good extent, and certainly the Eastern exposure, living in Japan for a couple of years, really kind of the Buddhism aspect and the Taoism introduced me to the idea of meditation. And so I remember coming back, and this I'm sometimes embarrassed to admit this, but it was like a Friday night while I was in high school, and my friends would be out at the football game or at parties or doing whatever teenage kids did in the 80s for the weekend. And I would be sitting in my living room, my parents would be out, and I'd have something in front of me and I'd be trying to meditate. And so, yeah, I mean, what the gift that I've received from yoga is that obviously something that is 3,000 or 4,000 years old or older works, and there's a principle and a practice behind it. And that's why 10 years ago, if you'd asked me, the value and purpose of yoga, I would have probably said something that was rote, whatever I memorized. But there really is something to the mind-body connection and to the relationship between what you observe and you. And the whole premise of yoga is that if you can really bring yourself into the present, then there's no difference between what you're observing and you. You're just kind of, that's the oneness of something. So yeah, so absolutely helping people realize there's more to life than the material world is absolutely something that I've become super passionate about.
Stuff, man. So I want to know from you, what is the number one thing that holds 95% of the population back in your wisdom?
Yeah, well, I mean, the big thing is fear, right? Like fear is the great negator of dreams and possibilities, and it's doubt. And really, that's, I'd say doubt really comes in. It's funny because I'm actually doing some video content for this team out in the UK on absolute certainty, the power of absolute certainty. And when you think about it, people, we all have these big dreams and aspirations we want to see fulfilled. And so we see what we want and we figure out, well, this is how we're going to get it. And so we tap into some amount of our potential and we take action, and then we assess the results we get. We're like, am I closer to my goal or am I not? And if we are close, then people get reinforced and they get encouraged and their belief strengthens and like, I'm on the right path. But it's when people get stuck or they don't get the results and they're like, oh, wait a minute, what's happening? That's when the doubt starts to creep in. And whenever you start to doubt yourself, you're going to tap less of your potential because you don't believe that you can accomplish what you're set out to accomplish. When you tap less of your potential, you take less action. The results you get don't match what you expect. And the cycle repeats itself until you find yourself saying, oh, you know what, that wasn't going to work anyway. It's too hard, it's too difficult. And really what that is doubt is caused by inaction. And that's when we start overthinking because we have mastered the inner world. And when that happens, that's when the fear creeps in, or it's like, what if I fail? Or what if this happens? What if this happens? And instead of taking action, which is really kind of the remedy and cure for doubt, people got caught up on their own story. And that's what discourages people from fulfilling their dreams.
And so, I mean, obviously, when you were talking about that, I was thinking about when I was 21 years old and I went to my first Anthony Robbins seminar. Okay.
Yep.
And I started to figure out, which nobody had ever told me this stuff before. I started to figure out how my brain worked. And once I figured out how my brain actually worked, and you're going to kind of explain how our brain works, but I just wanted to preface this by saying, once I figured out the actual science behind how a brain works,
Yep.
my whole life changed because it all made sense. It all, like all the challenges I had as a child, it all made sense now. I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
that's what happened. And so kind of share with our audience about how the brain works.
Yeah, well, so I'm going to use mind instead of brain.
Okay.
But really, if you think about it, and I love, it's cool that you said when you were 21 and then you said Anthony Robbins, because I don't, now he's Tony Robbins, but it's cool that, I mean, it's amazing to me that you've been a part of his journey for so long because the man is a genius. But our mind is really structured and has been evolved over time to for survival, right? And so it's about keeping you safe. And when you look at what the mind is really, how it's constructed, and you realize it's meant to keep you safe, that's why people box themselves in. And like we all talk about, you have to think outside the box or shift your paradigms. Bob Proctor is a big, man of paradigms. And people reinforce their story because we know people are going to do everything in their power to stay true to how they define themselves. And so when you tell yourself that you can't do something, your mind kind of locks that into your body. And it's like, okay, we can't do this. We can't do this because I'm too fat, I'm too slow, I'm too skinny, I'm too old, I'm too this, I'm too that. And when we block that out, all we're doing is rationalizing why we're not going to tap into more of our potential. And once you realize that the mind is hardwired for survival, and if you kind of operate from a place really in your heart, or you figure out, you know what, I know that in order to do something I've never done or become someone I've never been, I have to step out of my comfort zone. I mean, that's just simple truth. I cannot think the same thoughts I've always thought and get a new outcome. That's impossible. And that's kind of the definition of insanity that we've heard throughout our lives. So you really have to embrace the fact that if there is more to us than just this physical body and more to us than this mind, then there's a power that we can tap into. And for me, that power is absolute certainty, right? And it's what you believe. And absolute certainty is nothing more than conviction that something is the case. And so it really comes down to what is your ultimate belief. And when you figure out that you are only limited by what you believe, then you can accomplish incredible things. And really, I mean, in fact, I'm reading, have you ever read, I know Tony mentions it, Claude Bristol's The Magic of Believing. Have you ever read that book?
Years ago. Yeah.
I just broke it out again to start rereading it because I think it's so powerful and impactful. But it's really, you have to appreciate, and this is kind of a yoga aspect too, you are not your mind. And if you think you're your mind, then you become enslaved to a process that wants to keep you in survival mode. And it's overcoming that is oftentimes very difficult for people, but that's where the magic of life happens. And honestly, I mean, even during the course of the pandemic, right, the big disruption for most people was suddenly life wasn't planned out. We weren't looking 3 and 4 weeks or months ahead saying, oh, we're doing this in August, we're doing this in September, in October, we're going to go here. Now it was, oh my gosh, what is today going to bring and how am I going to be prepared to handle that? Well, if you think about it, that's kind of why I like the lighthouse keeper, because it's about like sailing on today's storms and sailing today's seas. You can't worry about navigating yesterday's storms because that's done. And if you look too far in the future, you're going to miss out what's happening in front of you today. And that's really the journey that we all must take. And that's ultimately where we want to be, is not to a place where I'm in the driver's seat and I'm on cruise control, but I am on the driver's seat and I am consciously aware of everything that's happening, because that's where the real fruit and fulfillment of life is.
And I think, you talk about focus and how the mind really, is what's going to increase your focus. When you think about that, is that because you're in the present so much? Is because you stay in the present that you can stay more focused? I mean, what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And well, really, you attract what you focus on, right? You get more of what you focus on. And that's true for any of us. That's a universal principle. It's a universal law. It really comes down to certainly being present, but you also have to, the big piece is, at least in my experience, is you have to forgive yourself. Like, you have to sort of let go of all the stuff that you've told yourself over the years, all the emotional wounds, all the failed relationships, all the failed dreams, whatever. Like, you have to let all that stuff go, because that is just spiritual, mental, psychological baggage that you're holding on to. And if part of your focus is on something that happened 10, 20, 15 years ago, guess what? It's not here. It's not in the present moment. And the only moment that matters is right now. And so the beauty of releasing yourself from those things is, once you allow more of your energy and awareness to be in the present moment, then you can start to say, okay, well, where do I want to sail tomorrow? I've navigated today's seas, whatever that may be, but now I know where I start when I'm going. And once I have a better direction and sense of where I want to go, that's where the focus comes in. It's like, all right, let me see how much progress did I make today? And then we check in tomorrow and it's like, hey, well, how am I going to make progress today? And we know progress is happiness. Progress is like the juice of fulfillment that we all want. So that's really where the piece of focus comes in, is bringing yourself into the present moment, is releasing yourself from the anxiety of worrying too far into the future and the regret, shame, or whatever you have from whatever happened in your past.
I love the way you talk about that, because I think we all do it. We think too far into the future.
Yeah.
And we miss today. We miss the juice, the fun, the greatness that's happening today, because we're so focused on too far in the future. And so I love that you shared that, because that's an issue that I've probably had in my life. And I was talking to somebody the other day, and they were talking about procrastination. And I think for me personally, I think if you do have a high level of desire to make progress, to do good today, you tend to procrastinate less, because you're focused on today. Like, what's my day going to look like today? How am I going to achieve whatever it is that I want to achieve today? Let's focus on today. Tomorrow's going to come anyways. So tomorrow's going to happen anyways. I mean, you can't stop it. It's going to happen. The sun's going to rise, and the sun's going to fall. The sun's going to rise. And so if we can just stay in the present and stay focused on today's activities, I think we can we can make a little bit of a better progress. And so when you think about mistakes that you could honestly say that you've made, because I know I've made my share of mistakes.
Oh, sure.
I've said stupid things. I've screwed up business deals. I've made bad investments. You name it. I've made lots and lots of mistakes. I've procrastinated. I've been lazy. I've all of the above. And so I want you to share with our audience, what sort of mistakes have you made that maybe you've learned from?
Oh man. Chasing the wrong thing for the wrong reasons. And that's probably the biggest one. I'll give you a funny example because I've been writing about it recently is, so I grew up in the 80s. That was, again, I know that's ancient history for some people, but that's when MTV was just starting out. That's when music videos were this new way to experience bands. And so for me, especially being around the military, heavy metal was a thing because I was around heavy metal tanks and airplanes and everything else all the time. And so I loved Motley Crue, Iron Maiden, Judas Priest. And now not only could I hear these bands, but I could see them. And obviously when you're seeing a music video, it's the best stuff the band wants you to see about them. So it's the limousine rides and the airplane rides and the 40,000 screaming fans. And as a young, impressionable military brat who didn't know a lot about the world except having lived in Japan for a couple of years, I was like, I want to be a rock star. Like that is the bomb. And so I remember I saved up my money. I got an electric guitar. I got a small amp. And I was like, okay, musical gods, come bless me with talent. And I remember, like, I learned, if you've ever heard Judas Priest's Breaking the Law, I think they've even had it maybe on commercials now on TV. I learned like the basic riff for Breaking the Law, and that was the extent of my musical career. I didn't, and part of it was, we can talk about this, is motive, right? My motive was self-serving. I wanted the adulation, I wanted the fans, I wanted the rides, I wanted the fame. I didn't want to put in the work. I didn't understand that Eddie Van Halen dedicated his life to learning how to make a guitar do things that no one else had ever made it do, or Jimmy Page or Jimi Hendrix, or these just rock gods. And so, I didn't take music lessons. I didn't join the band. And it was terrible because I was just like, what did I learn from that? The guitar sat in the corner of my room probably for 6 months, and then it became part of a yard sale. And I mean, that's obviously a small minor mistake, but the mistakes, and I come to a point in my life where I don't see them as mistakes. I see them as lessons, because ultimately everything we do, we believe we're doing for a reason until we believe we're doing it for a reason that is going to serve something. And when we do things that are going to serve us, we get a result sometimes that is self-serving, and that's not always a great thing. And what I've really learned to appreciate is putting my energy into the things that are going to serve other people, because that's where the real fulfillment in life is. And to have someone come up to me and say that my book changed their life is the most humble and gratifying thing that I've ever experienced, because it's like, how could something that I say, especially with my first book, which I thought was so difficult to write because I was so anxiety ridden over, could I actually finish writing a book? But to have people say that is incredibly gratifying. And so you realize, what is my motive for doing anything in my life? If my motive feels good or doesn't feel good for me, that's one thing. But if it's good for me, and writing both my books has been good for me, and it's good for other people, then those two definitions being true, we can determine that it serves a greater good. And so if my motive for doing anything is serving a greater good, then I'll put as much energy into that as possible. And ultimately, if we go back to kind of that process for accomplishing anything, the greater good I know something I'm doing can serve, the more incentive I'm going to use to tap into more of my potential.
And so when you talk about greater good, I think some people forget that if you help enough people get what they want, I mean, you'll get everything you could ever imagine, at least in my life. I mean, I wake up every day and I go, all right, how can I make the world a little bit better? How can I make my teams better? How can I make the family better? How can I make my kids better? Every day I try to think, how can I make, just this world, I'm a little speck in the universe, right? How can I make this little area a little bit better? And it's amazing how many opportunities come my way, how many great people I get to associate with, how many wonderful people I know and I've gotten to know. And yeah, you're right. I mean, there's nothing like that person that, and by the way, I am that person to other people all the
Yeah.
time as well.
Yep.
Like I'm that person that will send, Anthony Robbins a note and say, "Hey, dude, you changed my life, man."
Yeah.
I'm that person that
Yeah.
I'll text somebody on social media and I'll say, "You know what you're doing is you're making the world a better place." And you don't know me. You probably, we may never meet, but I just want to let you know just a little something that you're special, you're important, and I notice you.
Yeah.
And it's just it's because I think, and I'm a big believer, and as well as I'm sure you are, in frequencies. And I believe that frequencies, if we're on the right frequencies, frequency, life tends to work out a little bit better.
Yep.
I can always tell when I'm on the wrong frequency, and I can always tell when other people are on the wrong frequency.
Yeah.
It's just because they're repelling, okay,
Yep.
versus attracting. And so I spend a lot of my time understanding that, as well as I listen to frequencies. As a matter of fact, I'm doing I just finished a 21-day program for soak.com,
Okay.
and SOAAK. And it's a frequencies with my voice in there. And it's pretty cool. And they got all kinds of different frequencies for all kinds of issues and challenges and whatever. But I don't know, what are your thoughts on frequencies and the law of attraction, quantum physics, all that
Yeah.
stuff?
Yeah. No. So I can tell you without question, I believe in higher power, and my belief is that there is a frequency that is unique to each of us, to that higher power. And so, first, I mean, hopefully it's obvious, but I absolutely agree with the concept of frequencies too, right? Because you can tell. I mean, you can tell. I think, certainly you and I have had that experience, but I would imagine a lot of your audience has too, where you walk into a room and either you notice someone right away or they notice you right away. And it's just like, wow. And I've seen it in my gym where I connect with people and it's created relationships. I went to a Tony Robbins event in 2017. I went to Date with Destiny down in Palm Beach. And as I was leaving the airport, this Uber came up and I had requested it and someone else requested it. And we had been friends ever since. So we've been friends for 5 years now because we both went to the Tony Robbins event. We had dinner one night. She's a Canadian woman, brilliant, entrepreneur, fantastic person. And so there's absolutely something to the frequency. Then the question becomes, if you get really focused on you and how you can serve the world, my happenstance or my perception, at least at this point in my life, is that you tighten up your frequency. And we all, and especially, Daniel, think about it today. We live in an age where, one, we can connect, see each other instantly and having this instant communication from anywhere in the world virtually. But just with the power of the internet, 100 years ago, our ancestors would take 30 or 40 years literally to find out information that we can find out in minutes. I mean, that is phenomenal to me. And so when I look at what's going on today and all the stuff that's going on in social media, I've got a young friend of mine who is just starting out as an entrepreneur, and she's just coming out with her clothing line. She's launching on Saturday. She could be more excited. I'm so happy for her. But what we're coming to is a place where we all have the ability to express ourselves on an individual level that is unprecedented in human history. Like if you think back to post-World War II, certainly here in the US, we became a factory. Like men became a factory. Like we're processing data, we're processing machines, we're doing all this stuff. And now we're to a place where individual identity and expression of that identity is something to be celebrated and something that we can really absolutely harness. So it's amazing to me. And to me, that is just speaking to the idea of frequency. And when you really tune into the idea of serving some other people and as many people as you can, or how can you make the biggest impact on the world? When you ask yourself those questions, your mind is going to find an answer for you.
And I think we all need to use the feelings that we have, and that so some people aren't supposed to be in your life. Some
Yep.
people are not. I mean, I've been in the recruiting business for 25 years, and we've I've met every type of person that you could imagine, good frequencies, bad frequencies, you name it.
Yeah.
And and I think for me though, personally, I think and I tell this all the time, one of the biggest mistakes that I made is I spent way too much time with the wrong people early on.
Yep.
which they stole from me, my frequencies. They saw, or at least they lowered my frequency, throughout the early years. And then when I figured out that you could tap into just a higher level of thinking, whether, whoever it is that you get to meet or put yourself in an environment of, it's kind of like the whole, whoever you hang around,
Proximity.
you become.
Yep.
Yeah. And so I really could attest to it's real and it's right. And I hope people that are listening right now that you spend some time today learning and trying to figure out what frequencies you want to be on and the people that you want to surround yourself with and the information that you want to be downloaded into your mind, because it's so important. It's so like our brains, our minds are so precious. We should treat them with kid gloves. And so anyways, look, man, this has been such a cool conversation. I want everybody to get to know you. I mean, this is a great understanding of your thought process and who you really are. And I want people to know you and be able to seek you out, right? Because there are people that might be interested in your coaching. There might be some people that want to buy your books. There might be some people that just want to send you a message on Instagram and say you're a stud. Okay. So whatever it is, tell us how to get a hold of the awesome David Richards.
Well, Daniel, thank you so much for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure. I love the dialogue, and I love, obviously when you engage with someone else, you tune into a frequency, you make a frequency between you. And that's the whole concept behind masterminds. And certainly having been to enough Tony Robbins events now, I get what Tony's doing too, and his staying power to do that over the course of his career is phenomenal. So I can be reached at davidrichardsauthor.com. I'm on Instagram and Twitter at davidrichardsauthor. So thank you again so much, Daniel. I really appreciate it.
So I just want to make send out a little message to the audience right now and say, look, if you are wondering, should I get a hold of this dude? I'm just telling you, I mean, I've read a lot about him, and this was a great opportunity to chat. But I want you guys to get to know him. I want you to send him a message today on Instagram and say, hey, David, I saw you or I heard you on Wealth on the Beach podcast. And I just want you to know that we appreciate your time and your effort and your wisdom, because you brought a lot of wisdom to the table today, and we appreciate you so much. And we're going to go out there and we're going to get your book. We're going to follow you, and we're going to build a relationship with you that can serve the world in a much better way. So thanks again, David. I want everybody to make sure that you're continuing to dream bigger. Make sure you get after it. But most importantly, do it now. God bless you. We will see you at the top.